We are very pleased to be welcoming the director and one of the actors from Joy. And I just want to start off with one word of congratulations, because last week when they announced the nominees for the Golden Globes, Joy received a nomination for Best Film in the musical or comedy category. Nice way to start. I'm going to say one thing just honestly. I was expecting from most of the actors in the film the excellence that they've been showing for years, Jennifer Lawrence and Bradley Cooper and Robert De Niro. But in all honesty, the actor who surprised me the most was Isabella Rossellini with the fully realized character of Trudy. So I am very grateful to have both. I'm going to start off with a question for David O. Russell. Although you said you wanted to tell them something about the 92nd Street Y and its importance to you?
This has been a very special place to me, going back to when I was a struggling writer here, and I would come up here to see great writers speak on this stage. So it's an honor for me to be here, and I want to thank you all for coming out. And I'll tell the story at the end.
Honor for us, too. Could you tell us just a little about the origin of this? I know that the story was co-written with Annie Mumolo, who also co-wrote the original Bridesmaids film with Kristen Wiig. How did that develop, and did you write the screenplay directly for most or all of the actors?
Well, just to clarify, the project was offered to Jennifer and myself together as a team, and we thought in some senses it might be too soon for us to do something together again so quickly, but we also believe in acting from instinct. So we both talked about it quite a bit and decided there was a movie here that we hadn't seen before, that we both wanted to make, that exceeded Annie's draft. And Annie very graciously actually stepped aside because she knew I wanted to write it from the ground up, and I have great admiration for her work, but she had a different thing that was more of a biopic, and I wanted to do something that had these larger questions in it. What is the emotion, joy, when you're 10 years old in your room? What is it when you're married? What is it when you're divorced and trying to support yourself? And you must make peace with life and your family. So she stepped aside, and we share story by credit, and I wrote the script from the ground up, and I do write principally first for Jennifer, and to do things we've never done before. And then for Robert and Bradley and so on, to do things that are worthy of them that we've not done before.
If I'm not mistaken, because I did a little research, Trudy is a fictional character?
Well, partly. I mean, it is absolutely true. Some of the stranger things in the movie are true. And I got the blessing of Joy, the actual Joy, who it's based on, to do with it what I wanted to do. And I'm happy to say she embraces the spirit of the film, because I wanted to make cinema out of it. And there was a girl, the only reason any of this happened, why we're sitting here right now, is because the father, Rudy, was a romantic who ran a metal garage that built all the school bus routes in eastern Long Island and maintained the buses, and had a divorce that went on for many years with Joy's mother. And he was a great romantic who dated all these crazy facts I learned on a 900 number. Because I said to Joy, when did you really think of this idea? Because to me, it's not as much just about the creation of one idea, Annette. It's about someone creating a family business that's rather large and really becoming true to themselves and learning how to wield power and lose their innocence in some way. So she said it was on a boat. I said, just like the scene with De Niro. I said, like a motorboat? She said, no, a big 60-foot sailboat. I go, but you told me you were broke. She said, I was broke. It was my father's boat. But I said, but you said he was broke. She said, well, it was his girlfriend. I said, well, how does a broke guy with a metal garage have a lady with a 60-foot sailboat? Well, he'd go on a 900 number. I said, what are we talking about right now? What is that? She said it was like a Match.com in the 80s and 90s. I said, are you kidding me? She said, no, why are you focusing on this? I said, this is why I make movies. So when I was trying to think of so the girlfriend did make it possible. That is true. And she did have a big sailboat, and that is where the idea first came from. Now, to create her as this singular creature, who else is like Isabella Rossellini? Let's think. Nobody. So, I mean, I just love listening to her speak. When David first approached me to do this, I felt, in a way, why did he want me? And I said to my daughter, am I really that scary? I don't think of myself as being that scary. And she said, actually, to me, Mom, you are. You can be isn't that a story you told me? So I just think I wanted someone very singular. I wanted someone who felt continental and romantic, yet who had been like a working girl wife of a Garmento. You know, I could see her whole story there. She met him in Milano at the swimwear trade show. You know, and my father was a salesman, so I have great respect for salesmen in all the world and the people that put bread on their families' tables. And so she has this continental, elegant air about her, yet she's tough. And she also is someone who worked. So I thought that was very special. You know? And she and Robert had a very special chemistry in the car that I liked quite a bit.
Well, I mean, I'm very interested because, I mean, you started acting in Vincent Minnelli's A Matter of Time, you know, that's starring Ingrid Bergman, and you've been working steadily ever since. I don't know that everybody in this audience is aware that partly because you do speak Italian and French and other languages, you're constantly making films in Europe that we don't even get to see. I mean, I found out about your Josephine in you know.
Yes, my Josephine, I played.
With, you know,
when I talk about Napoleon, I always indicate myself because I played his wife. So I say, no, because Napoleon. And then people say, why do you indicate yourself? Because I'm Josephine.
But what I'm interested in, because we know that David O. Russell works with actors in a way that brings out the best in them, how was it different? For example, was it a question of rehearsal or improvisation for you? What were the aspects that distinguished the set of Joy from, I mean, I'm not going to list all of them, but I think of Blue Velvet and Big Night, and I think of Cousins and Guy Madden's films and John Schlesinger. You've worked with some of the greats, Peter Weir. Yeah. What's different?
Well, every director works differently.
Including your father.
Including my father. And one of the things that I love the most is to work with different directors and being directed by different hands. First of all, if the directors are as wonderful artists as David is, it's almost like taking a trip into their mind, you know? And if the mind is interesting, the trip is very interesting. So I try to be as available as I can. And David, I mean, to just say something that I think surprised, maybe in the American tradition, but I quickly felt at home. David talks during the take, and because I wasn't the only actress that was working with David the first time, and so I could see that some of my colleagues were thrown, because generally the director says action, silence. It starts with silence, said by the assistant director, then mark, and then action, and then cut, and then you can talk. But David directs you while you are doing the scene, and it surprised me at first just because I hadn't heard it for a long time, but my father directed like that. Because in Italy, all the film are dubbed later. Fellini, who was my father's assistant, directed that way. And he probably comes directly from silent movies, where the director directed right there. And I think it feels like an orchestra director. Once I was a voce recitante in an opera, and it was amazing because the orchestra director was telling to the fiddler, a little lower. You know, it was happening right then, and I felt very much like that with David. So I felt totally at home.
Thank you, Isabella.
That's good. I actually heard when you did the screening for SAG a few weeks ago, the actor Edgar Ramirez from Venezuela, who plays Tony, he mentioned something about you never knew where the camera was going to be. You know, he found that it was scary and liberating at the same time, that he never knew what to expect. And I didn't know, did you want to have this kind of spontaneity where an actor isn't just rehearsing and then doing exactly what he or she is supposed to?
Well, first let me correct this notion, because first I write a 176-page script, which I keep rewriting, right. All the way into pre-production and on the day of. And I don't know that I'm the only filmmaker to do that. I also have to compose every shot. You can't make these films on our schedules unless you have a very detailed plan. Having said that, and this film in particular had a very specific visual design that was preconceived with the frames, inspired by Edward Hopper and Andrew Wyeth in particular. And some of the classic cinema of the 40s and 50s, which we wanted a timeless feeling with more master frames and almost a black and white palette in the first half with more backlit and silhouettes. And the second half kind of becomes colorful when she enters this other realm and defines her own space. Because in the first half, she's defined by the space of others. Having said that, there are moments when you need to make a scene happen. And if I remained formal, we would never make our schedules. You know, to make a cinema that is about human beings principally, which we've done for 4 films now, which have reached wide audiences, and I should be sure to emphasize that point, because I have great respect for so many kinds of cinema, but we've had the pleasure and privilege of reaching wide audiences with The Fighter, Silver Linings Playbook, and American Hustle, and knock on wood, Joy. That's not easily done in today's marketplace. You need to have a lot of usually action or animation or special effects to reach a very wide audience. So that's a special, very small landing strip. And the reason I take all this time to tell you that is it means that we have a bargain with the studio that says this many days. And we invite that and we say, okay, and we make it part of our process. And Robert De Niro welcomes it because he says it does add a sense of immediacy. But it's not my plan to do it that way. I'm not John Cassavetes. We don't make up dialogue on the day. We're not doing what he did. We have a plan and we're following it, but here it comes. The baby's crying. The Edgar scene's a good story. The baby's crying in Jennifer's arms. She's saying, I don't want to shoot this scene with the baby crying. I said, what are you talking about? This is over a screaming baby. What are you talking about? That's what the scene's about, a screaming baby. And she goes, but it's upsetting to me. I said, perfect. Because you're about to get a divorce right now. And you're about to tell your husband that you can't do this another second. And she said, it's just so upsetting. I said, yeah, let's film it while you're so upset. And so she's crying and holding this crying baby and her husband. And during that scene, if we did it formally, Annette, we would have lost a day. You see what I'm saying? On a regular schedule. But I like to be very responsible with the budget and everything. I believe it's important to be a good partner to those who take a chance on you, especially in today's there's so much media and so many things being made. So during the take, I then start, it's like it's a circus. And I'm trying to make everything happen. I say, Edgar, start shouting at her in Spanish. What? I can't hear you over the baby. Edgar, talk to her in Spanish. What? I don't know, just say what, beg her to stay with you. Say some things. Okay, now Edgar, pray in Spanish. What? Pray. And then Edgar's famous that he says, halfway through the scene, I said, now Edgar, cry. And he said, what? I said, cry. And he said, well, I need a minute. I said, no, just cry. He said, what do you mean? And this is a great method of acting. You can go from the inside out, or you can come from the outside in. Yeah. And I do believe both are legitimate. I can make myself cry right now by the outside in. So I said, Edgar, I didn't remember this. He remembered this. I didn't remember this. He said, David, and I started going right there. I said, look, like me right now, I'm going to cry. This is while the camera's rolling. And so then he started faking it, and then he started to cry, for real. So that's an example of, I think, what you're talking about during the camera.
No, I mean, it's true. I mean, most of the time, especially when you go to acting school, they always teach you to do the inside out. And of course, it's very important that you feel like the character, you anchor your own emotion to the character. But with David, there were moments that I discovered that I would say, David, just say the line you want me to say it. And he would deliver the line, and I would copy it like a parrot. And I found that in the rhythm that he was giving me, like a music, there is emotion. And so I would repeat the same 3-4 times what David gave me, and then it was outside in, just by the rhythm of the delivery.
Because I thought that was a terrible cheating thing to do, that you were not allowed to do. That there was like an indication. You're never supposed to give an actor a line reading. And it was the great Dustin Hoffman who told me that it was a perfectly legitimate way to find a character, because rhythm and music of talking and how someone talks is a character. And if you repeat the rhythm enough, I enjoy imitating great characters from cinema, whether it's Ratso Rizzo or Benjamin Branagh, I can feel like that character. Just like when I did with Isabella. I feel like Isabella when I talk. I love talking like you. I could do it all day. I have so much fun doing it. So that is true. There's a rhythm, and there's the rhythm. And I have songs I sit on for 20 or 30 years that I want to put in a movie, and then we'll shoot a scene to, such as Nat King Cole, A House with Love in It, or Prokofiev's Cinderella, and others. But I also have lines of dialogue that I feel in a rhythm, and so that's part of the character.
Well, I love the scene where Trudy is asking Morris's 4 questions, and Joy's going to have to answer correctly. And on the one hand, you're a little dangerous, the character doing that, but I felt that the 1, 2, in other words, there was something about the rhythm of the delivery that was juxtaposed with the dangerous edge, and I found the scene absolutely magical.
Yes, it's one of my favorites, and I loved how fierce she was. She's a combination of rare vulnerability and authenticity and scariness, so that she can do. And I wrote that for you in that way, so you would say those questions. And the first 2 questions are actually questions I do ask people. And people say, well, how could those, the head of the studio was an attorney. And he said, I don't believe Jim Giannopoulos from Brooklyn, and I love him. He goes, you're going to give somebody money? The first 2 questions, David, where'd you go to high school? I mean, how is that a legitimate question to give somebody money? And then the second one, who were you in high school? I said, Jim, I ask everybody those 2 questions, and I found out a lot about them with those first 2 questions, a lot. Where did you go to high school?
Forest Hills High School.
Terrific. Where did you go to high school?
Italy, at the nuns.
Italy, at the nuns. Okay, so, and who were you in high school?
I was the person in charge of all the musical productions called Sing. It was a competition. Somebody here knows about it. We had a musical competition sophomore, junior, and senior year. We would put on a show every year, and that was my life was very tied up with that.
So you were an impresario even then?
Yeah.
And who were you in high school?
Oh, I was the donkey, the one that the nuns give you ears like this, and they put you on the corner because you're a really bad student. They call you the ass, the donkey.
Why?
Because I never did the homework. I skipped. I pretended to go to school. Then, I pretended to enter, and I would exit another door, and would take the bus and go to the beach and come back when the school was over to go home. I was really bad.
Wait. So how do you say donkey in Italian?
Asino.
Asino.
I feel another movie in the making here. I don't know. I was struck by the introductory title, Inspired by the Stories of True Women. It's in the plural.
Daring women.
Daring, I'm sorry.
True stories of daring women.
True story, exactly.
One in particular, yes.
See, thinking about the donkey in Forest Hills High School, I get
That's okay, you're allowed to get it right.
But why the plural? In other words, we know that we're going to be seeing pretty much the life of Joy Mangano. Could you talk a little about the strong women in general?
Well, to me, like I said, I didn't want to do, a biopic. That doesn't interest me. Just like I had no particular desire to make a movie about Abscam or about boxers. To me, it was about the people. It always begins with the people and the specificity of the people, how they talk, what they love, what makes them love life, what they're afraid of, how they dress, what their houses look like, how they love and how they hate. So that was the question for me in this picture. And to me, it was inspired by, in part, Joy Mangano, whose last name is never said, but joy is a wonderful word for me as a director. My friend Spike Jones said, will the movie also be about that emotion? I said, yes, at each different age, because that's the question for me. What is mature joy, and how is it different from childhood joy? Also, my mother is an inspiration. She had many adventures. She started at her kitchen table, including trying to get people elected locally, and I love kitchen table ventures where people are hovered around that kitchen table. And I love that determination of someone who's going to try to do something. And I also, poor Lillian Vernon, may she rest in peace, she died yesterday. Lillian Vernon was an inspiration to me. She grew up, I'm from Mamaroneck. We broke out of Brooklyn and went to the suburbs. I was the first generation out there, and she was in Mount Vernon, and she named her company after Mount Vernon, and she was the first very successful woman mail order for home products, and it was always a big deal in our house when you got one of those things, whether it was for the kitchen or the bathroom. And so she was an inspiration to me because she had a Latino husband. And I wanted Jennifer to have a Latino husband because I wanted her to speak Spanish, because I speak a little Spanish. And I just like challenging her to do different things she hasn't done before. And I also like multiculturalism. So her husband did want to be a singer, Tom Jones. He did live in the basement. They were the best divorced couple in America, which is something I haven't seen. But he wasn't Spanish. Elaine Vernon's husband was Spanish, her third husband.
And because Joy Mangano has a credit as executive producer and presumably was involved with you in the shaping of this, did she have any problem? In other words, what role did she play in terms of either limiting or giving you complete freedom?
She had to give me complete freedom right away, or Jennifer and I wouldn't have done it. Because Jennifer said, well, we'll do it if we can do what David and I do, you know. And so we were very frank about that. And she was trusting. And I had many phone calls with her. I didn't want to meet her in person because I didn't want to feel beholden to her personally. I know how hard it is to have a story made about your own life. I did it with The People and The Fighter. I know how difficult that is. How could any movie really feel like your life? It isn't. It's something else. It has pieces of your life in it. I remember meeting Robert Redford at the New York Film Critics a couple of years ago, and I said what a hero he'd been to me, and he's responsible for my first marriage and my first film. And and I said, I read a biography of you, and I thought he said, that's all horse shit. And I said, I'm sorry? He said, it's all horse shit. I said, weren't you a juvenile delinquent in Van Nuys? He said, yeah. I said, well, didn't you go to Europe and live on, you had nothing, you had no money? He said, yeah. I said, and he stopped me. He said, well, hold on, in his Robert Redford way. He said, let me ask you a question. How would you feel if someone wrote a book about your life? I said, point taken, sir. So Joy spent 100 hours on the phone with me. And I just asked her all the questions I like to ask, which she thought was odd, because the details I want to know about are not the details she thinks the movie's going to. She felt like she was being psychoanalyzed. And I asked her what people wore, and I asked her what soap operas her mother watched, and all that stuff that she didn't think was important. To me, that's the movie. So she was involved at that degree, and after that, we took it from there. And she's now come in and fortunately embraced the spirit of the film. And I'll tell you one little story about when I did meet her in person, which is Robert De Niro insisted that we meet the real father, Rudy, and Joy in person. And Jennifer, Robert, and I did it. And Robert let his office, like Rudy's garage, be the home of the beginning of this movie. And he was very gracious, and he would just come in and out. And he was very benevolent. And we soak up a lot from him because he runs a lot of businesses. He has many children. He has a big family, and he has to balance all their needs. And he was the Godfather in part 2. And we all fear, love, and respect him. So he was being like Rudy, letting it all get born in his office. And he'd just come and he'd let us do our auditions there. Did you audition there?
Yeah, I auditioned there.
So in this office, then we went to his lobby of his hotel, and we sat there with Joy, Rudy, and the daughter, Christy, very beautiful daughter who grew up. That's why I wanted to show her a little bit grown up in the end, to run her mother's business. She's a formidable young woman. It's truly a family business. And first thing out of the father's mouth when they sit down, this 80-year-old man in an Argyle sweater, first thing out of his mouth is, when I created all these things, when I did all these things, and we know that's not true, and we know that he sued her and lost, and we also know that without him none of it would have happened, and we know that she loves him and forgives him. And we looked at her to see if it was going to be like, the Jerry Springer show, where she was going to, grab him by the throat. And we learned so much about her in that moment. The way she sat there and just looked at him with love in her eyes and didn't say a darn word, didn't make a face, didn't do nothing, didn't look at us, didn't wink, didn't laugh. And we said, that's Michael Corleone. And I've never seen a woman in business, with a family business, being Michael Corleone like that. And that was why we were making the movie, because she has a very big spirit, and her husband works for her without any threat to his masculinity. He works for her, and he's her ex-husband. So these were all things that we loved.
Wow. I mean, it's true, in the film, early on, I thought, this woman is a paragon of forgiveness. I would not have the patience, with the father and the ex-husband and the half-sister. And I had to, reorient my sympathies to understand this is what she was, and it worked.
She was born that way. She was the one. Some people are born that way. Her grandmother, who was her true rock, more than her mother. Her mother was more like her third child, she always said. And that happens. That just happens. People are born that way. You know, her mother was born like this bird-like creature, and her grandmother was very formidable and always said that she believed in her. And that's all it took, was for one person. But to be the unanxious presence in the room, you see? And that's very, very powerful. Her grandmother's quiet but very strong, and Joy was the unanxious presence in the room. And that's a great power. When she says at the beginning of the film, this is a power. I don't need a prince. This is a special power. That's the power of anybody who will try to do anything, whether it's business, marriage, cinema, art, you will be alone. And that's why these frames were so important to us. You will walk through the valley alone, ultimately. No one will do it except you, ultimately. And you have to, that's why we liked framing her alone on the streets of Dallas, alone in that Edward Hopper shot of the window. She had to go alone. She had to do it herself, and she read all those documents herself. No one else read those. She was cooked, done, over. And she read, you ever try to read patent documents and legal documents? I couldn't read one. And she found the guy, and she got the goods on the guy, and she went and faced him off and beat him like a gangster. She made her bones. And then when she walked out of there, she was a different person. I don't know.
No, I mean, and two things. I commend you because I think that most movies these days, they still believe that the prince, in other words, that the romantic comedy has to have the kiss before the end. And even though I feel sometimes your kinship with Frank Capra films or others of the 30s and 40s, I think it's great that Joy remains her own person without depending upon a man for validation, and that makes this film a bit different from the mainstream. And I also love that you cast as her grandmother Diane Ladd, who for many of us still incarnates, I mean, Alice doesn't live here anymore. You know, she received 3 Oscar nominations for supporting actress, Diane Ladd, for Alice Doesn't Live Here and Wild at Heart and Rambling Rose. So, you know, inspired casting for someone that incarnates a whole history of American cinema feminism. You know?
Yes, she's a wonderful woman. She's an ordained minister. She was a very important person on our set, and these two have a very funny karma together. Martin Scorsese's one picture devoted to women, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, had Diane in it. And you were married to Marty shortly after that, right?
I was married to Marty, but Diane always says that she has, my mother was nominated the same year, and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. I think it was for Autumn Sonata. And then of course, I worked with Diana's daughter, Laura Dern, the great, great Laura Dern, in Blue Velvet, and Wild at Heart.
But what she says most interestingly, Diane, and with her big-hearted nature, is that she felt good that the Oscar went to a good purpose of Ingrid Bergman, who had been with that Academy Award symbolically welcomed back to Hollywood after being ostracized for 20 years for having married a married man, and that she thought that was very beautiful and forgiving. And I think the power of forgiveness is the greatest power in the world, and it's a true indication of strength. So to go to your point about forgiveness, you know, that was, anyway, that's what I really got from Brando, who also teaches people to cry from the outside in, or did. DiCaprio told me about an acting class that Brando taught in the Valley for some weird afternoon. But he brought in a homeless guy and just had him do stuff that they all did. But the way Brando carried his authority in that picture was as a very forgiving person. And I think that's especially powerful to me.
Yeah. I have a question also for Isabella Rossellini in terms of comparison, because I remember being on the jury of the Berlin Film Festival in 1998, where we voted you a special award for your performance in Left Luggage. Yes. This is a film that I urge you to see on Netflix, where you play a Hasidic woman.
Yes.
And this was, you know, very strange for me after seeing you playing the dangerous torch singer, Dorothy, in Blue Velvet or countless other films. But I'm aware of how you've worked in different countries on the one hand, but also independent versus Hollywood films on the other, which of course is true for you as well. You started out with, you know, Spanking the Monkey and Flirting with Disaster, and now you've got a Fox release, not Fox Searchlight, a big Fox release. But for you, is it very different, the experience of making a film, let's say, with a European director, or is a David O. Russell set sort of a mixture of the Hollywood and the
a mixture? I think
artisanal?
that, I don't know, I'm often asked the question why I make those sort of independent film. And I give an answer because I feel like I have to give an answer, but I don't really know the reason. I think there's two reasons. One, the personal reason is that my father was an independent director, or whatever you want to call it, an artist. So when somebody comes with a very different handwriting, I am fascinated by it. Instead of saying, is it going to be commercially viable? I don't know, I don't think about it because my family never talked about that. So I am actually so surprised that David works at Fox. It's incredibly lucky because, because you're so artistic and so original and so different, and it is quite extraordinary. So the other reason that I'm not hired, I think, in big Hollywood film, is that I have an accent, and it's always a little bit hard to integrate me. I can never be part of a family. So, yes, I speak languages, so I compensate by working in France, in Italy, in Holland, in Sweden. But every time you hire me, I can never be a sister, a daughter. I can have brothers and sisters. I'm always a little bit I have to be the outsider.
Well, there's something slightly, shall we say, exotic as opposed to outside. Something a bit more cosmopolitan, a bit more international. And that, I think, only feeds into, it makes Trudy a far richer
Continental,
Continental.
as Robert De Niro says. Oh, you got an accent. Oh, continental.
And one other thing, though, you are yourself a director. I think some of you are aware that, especially for the Sundance Channel, Isabella Rossellini has, back starting around 2009, been directing like 40 short films already.
Yes.
Green Porno is the overriding title.
Thank you.
And I'm just wondering, for you, is the experience of something like playing Trudy in Joy, how does that feed into whatever you do as a director, or are they two different worlds?
Well, they are a little bit two different worlds because my films are very eccentric. I transform myself. I say, if I were a fly, then I transform myself into a fly, and I'm made this way, or I have courtship. So it's, but I think it further liberated me from any fear, do I look good? Because I play a worm. I play a duck, a worm. A sardine. So it doesn't matter. And I actually think that also, whatever I write for myself, it's comical, or at least I hope it's comical, but people seem to laugh. And that wasn't something that was offered to me often, to do something comical.
They're extraordinary, and I want to try to produce an hour or something that can go on television, because she did it in a huge theater in Boston when we were shooting. The whole cast went to watch her do this performance that's extraordinary.
Because I made a monologue out of my films. So.
And you learn all about nature, which becomes this profound meditation on existence. It's just unbelievable. And she's acting out with these big papier-mâché objects. If I was a sardine, I would have to be on the inside of the school. That is where it is safest. But in the middle of the school is the least amount of oxygen. So I'm constantly having to go to the outside of the school so I can get some oxygen, but that is where the predators will come and eat me. So I'm constantly, I loved it. And it's remarkable. And it's all about how they mate. And she'll tell you all about the cloaca on the
turkeys and birds.
The turkeys that are bred now are too big, so their coaculas can't meet. I told you, it's mating. Here we are with the coacula.
You're making me think of the Haitian dish in Joy. Sorry,
That's chaka.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, chaka. Yeah.
I know we don't have too much time. I found out just before we went on stage that this man has a plane to catch because he's in the midst of a lot of promotional activity. But I did want to ask a question that incorporates Joy and some of your other work, because I feel like you're one of the really best directors in terms of questioning through your films who we are as Americans. I mean, you seem to really be posing this question, whether it's the family in many of the recent films, but I'm thinking also of one of my favorites of yours, which is Three Kings, where you start out assuming that it's one kind of American dream to get rich, one kind of heroism maybe, and then you realize as the film goes on that it's conscience and it's about enacting the ability to save somebody, to rescue, that's a different kind of American dream or heroism. And here too, I find that in Joy, you're taking what could have been a very ordinary life, the word is used at the beginning, and seeing what was extraordinary from the beginning. Is this something conscious for you, or is it just that you're drawn to these compelling stories that happen to have American people at the center who could have been sort of dismissed or marginalized?
I am interested in ordinary people, and I did discover in the last 5 years, starting with The Fighter, which is a new chapter for me, that who you are is defined by where you're from and who you loved and who you were surrounded by, even if you struggled with them. And there's a great, deep, intuitive truth you can find in that. And the fact that I could find that truth about the people in The Fighter, even though I'm half Italian and half Russian, I'm not Irish, I related to that family, and that was able to make it very personal to me. And that's where women characters started to become very powerful to me, with Melissa Leo, who was honored that year, and the Seven Sisters in that film. And Silver Linings Playbook, I love the homes. I suppose I love community, and I love neighborhoods, and I love homes, and I'm fascinated by them. And I feel like there's something very profound about families. Everything's right there. The deepest feelings, the deepest animosities, the deepest betrayals, the deepest loyalties. So these are all things that I do love. Three Kings is a different question. I was surprised that no one had made a picture about that war, and now that war has gone into syndication. I mean, that was when it was the first war, not even the second war. And my only commentary on that will be, I came to think that the first George Bush had been right when he said, I thought he was wrong when he didn't try to establish democracy there, but it turns out he was quite right. It's very difficult to do, and perhaps not our business. And perhaps if we didn't go over there, perhaps a lot of other things might not have happened, in my opinion. Yeah. Now, regarding Fox, the studio, we're very fortunate this is a Fox picture, and it's, as I say, an extremely rarefied air where you have a talent like Jennifer Lawrence, who has 2 franchises and is a great actress. Very unusual climate where only certain plants will grow, that confluence of things. And that I happen to have been making this commerce for them out of these almost art films about people. So that's rarefied air that could evaporate in 2 seconds. And I did bring in Megan Ellison, who's a very daring woman, young woman, the daughter of Larry Ellison. And she's a very brave, young, gay woman who has financed American Hustle when other people wouldn't. And I brought her in for a piece of this picture because I wanted her there, because she's like my godmother. She knows how we make independent films. She's worked with Spike Jonze and Paul Anderson and numerous other directors, and Catherine Bigelow. So I feel safer when she's there because she understands how we make independent films. And so I was very happy for her to be part of this. And I was, so Fox wouldn't have offered it to me if we didn't have all those conditions.
No, and I mean, to me, this is an example of an independent film under a studio label. And in closing, I just want to say that one of the lines I'm constantly quoting to my students is from the great philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he said, the invariable mark of wisdom is to find the miraculous in the common. And it seems to me that Joy and your other films fulfill this beautifully. Thank you to Isabella Rossellini. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you.
Thank you.